There are some really key actions and strategies that you need to implement to be the least impacted by iOS 14. And this video is going to go through step by step how to implement every single one so you'll be all set. So what is this iOS 14 update from Apple and why is it so important for Facebook ads? Well, when people do their update, Apple is going to ask them the next time they open Facebook if they want to allow Facebook to track their activities across other websites. And they'll have two options, either ask app not to track or allow. And I think a lot of people are going to ask it not to track. So this will affect your ads on both Facebook and Instagram. Apple is not going to tell us the exact number of people who choose ask app not to track versus allow. My guess is more than half of people are going to opt out of it tracking. So if iPhone and iPad sales are somewhere around the 40% range, we may be looking at 20, 25, maybe even 30% of people who are not going to be able to actually track in the same way we were before. So how is this going to impact Facebook ads? Well, when you're normally running Facebook ads, you're able to track just about everything across your website. So you can track how many people make it to each checkout page, how many people add to cart or click on specific things. And then you can show future ads, let's say just to people who added something to their cart or landed on a specific page. You also use this pixel to track different behaviors. So you can say, hey, we showed this ad, 1% of people clicked on it, 25% added to their cart, and 5% made it to checkout. So you can kind of keep track of that different process that people go through and optimize your Facebook ads based off that. So people choose ask app not to track. Going forward for those people, you won't really be able to track their different behaviors on the website in the same way or show ads to people who visited specific pages or took specific actions. Showing ads to people who visited your website or have taken specific actions have for a long time been one of the core parts of a marketing strategy, where you're generally spending a little bit more money to get it in front of brand new people. Sometimes you may break even or even lose money with reaching the new people, but then you're able to do retargeting and target people who are really, really interested, visited specific pages, and those are often extremely profitable. Well, with people who opt out, you won't really be able to run those same type of ads. So when this first came out, people thought you wouldn't be able to track purchases at all. And I'm going to show you how you can get that set up so it's still tracking the purchases and you can see how well those ads are doing right after we talk a little bit of strategy. So how should this impact our overall strategy? Now, I would definitely run a lot of the same retargeting ads because this isn't going to impact every single person. People on Android, people on desktop, people who allowed it to track are still going to be able to see those retargeting ads. So those audiences are just going to be a little bit smaller because they're not going to include people who opted out of being tracked, but they're still really profitable and really important. Especially on the video side, if you're sending people from Facebook to your website to watch different videos, you may want to actually test out hosting that video in full in your Facebook ads, and then you can add the people who really engaged with it, liked it, commented on it, or watched a lot of it into a retargeting audience who's going to be a lot more interested in buying. Technically, someone giving you their email and becoming a customer gives you some level of permission to email them in the future, but I actually recommend on the checkout having people check a box to opt in to receive future deals, future emails, future promos. That way they're going to be more engaged and more excited about actually receiving those offers. Sending emails can be insanely profitable, and we want to rely on Facebook less and less to reach our existing customers and clients. It's especially important now to create ads that are engaging and very shareable, which leads to a lot more shares, likes, and comments. And you can go through and invite all of those people to like the page. That way they'll continue to see your different posts. You can build that relationship with them, and you can add them to a retargeting audience of people who have engaged with the page or liked the page. Once you finish this tutorial, you'll want to check out my copywriting tutorial, which gives a ton of strategies for creating more engaging ads, and I'll link to that at the very end too. Overall, my ad accounts are just looking incredibly strange. There's all sorts of reporting issues. There's different campaigns that are showing 0 results for the last year. Those are campaigns I know have generated tons and tons of sales, things not reporting properly, or just some data not coming in correctly. So here are a few things that you can do. I have found that campaigns in particular are not reporting correctly, but if you go down into the ad set level, I'm actually getting a lot more accurate data. So I am needing to actually tally up the different ad set results to know how well I'm doing. I'm also seeing a delay in results, so sometimes I'm not really getting a report on how well the ads have done until a couple days later, which is really frustrating. I've actually turned off all my automations. My automations adjust, so based on the performance of the day, it will scale it up or pause it. I'm doing that a lot more manually and actually comparing it with the sales data from the website itself so that I can kind of know, hey, okay, sales are doing pretty well today. I am going to turn all the ads up a little bit, or hey, I'm getting full data on this one ad set. I'm really going to crank the budget of that one. I'm also looking at a lot of historical data. So if I see a campaign has been running for 5 months and it's done really, really well for the entire 5 months, I am going to be less likely to pause that or turn it down if I'm not getting the proper data to know how well it's doing, because I know it has been a strong performer in the past. And especially comparing it to the overall website sales, if sales are good for the day, I'm going to leave it the same or even turn up the spend of the ones that historically have done really well. Since we're seeing so many weird glitches and reporting errors at the start, which I feel like will smooth out over time, I'm launching a little bit less brand new ads to test because I want to know that the data I'm getting on those new tests is actually accurate so I can know, hey, this ad performed really well. So I am testing, but I've cut that down by quite a bit. If you still want really good data of how many people from Facebook are actually making it through the checkout process, what you can do is actually create a separate checkout on your website that only people from Facebook are being sent to. So then you can actually look at the different page views on like Google Analytics and actually know, okay, the people who clicked on that, this is how many actually landed on this page because it's only people from Facebook. If you're sending people from Facebook to the general website and then tracking page views, that will include a lot of people Googling your business or coming from organic social media or other paid platforms. So this would kind of separate it where you can get a better sense of the results from those specific Facebook ads because they're just going to those pages and you can track the performance along those pages. The first big change is to attribution window. You'll no longer be able to do 28-day click or 28-day view. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, if someone clicks on your ad and then makes a purchase, let's say 3 weeks later, that original ad would actually get credit for the purchase because Facebook can actually track and know, hey, this person clicked on it, 3 weeks later they bought it, we're gonna give credit. Now, it's now going down to 7 days, so you won't actually be able to track that for longer than 1 week. So if someone clicks on an ad, buys it 10 days later, it's not gonna show up under your ad account. Now, obviously you still made the sale and that money will still end up in your bank account, but because Facebook is no longer giving your ad account credit for people who clicked on an ad and then 8 days later made a purchase, you're likely gonna see your overall ad account performance drop. So the default now is 7-day click and 1-day view. So if someone clicks on your ad for the next week, it's gonna track if they make a purchase and give it credit, or if they just saw your ad for the next 1 day, if they later on go to the website and make a purchase, it will give that ad credit. This isn't only for people who opted out of tracking. This is actually going to be for your whole ad account. It's only going to track for the 7 days. So here's exactly what you want to do. You want to go onto your website and start really closely tracking the exact number of purchases that are happening on your website. Because if you see in Facebook Ads Manager, your performance has dropped by 5% or 10%, it may just be that people are making purchases that don't fall within that 1-day view, 7-day click. So your sales haven't gone down, it's just reporting less through Facebook. This especially impacts people with expensive products. Like if your product is $1,000, people will often need to think it over and you'll generally have to follow up with them quite a bit, send them reminders, specific messages. You're gonna be a lot more limited in doing that. So if you're following up with people over 3 weeks, you may need to try to truncate that down to just a week that you're following up with them and just do so more frequently. I would really keep good track of your customer list, have all of their information and things like that. This way you can actually compare your results on Facebook to your growing customer list, and you can actually upload this list of customers anytime you want to create a lookalike or custom audiences. You'll still be able to do that. You'll definitely want to use Google Analytics quite a bit going forward because it has such good data on how many people are visiting each page, how long they're spending on each page, and you can actually compare and contrast the data you're getting through Facebook with the data you're seeing in Google Analytics. And this will show you the website as a whole, but you can draw a lot of conclusions on your Facebook ads and how they're doing based off that. If you do need to set up Google Analytics, I have a tutorial on setting that up. With iOS 14, you're now limited to 8 different events that you can track per domain. So events are things like view content, page view, add to cart, purchase, lead, things like that. So you actually want to make a list of the 8 ones that you'd really like to track going forward. I haven't found this super restrictive, but it is important to think about this in advance. I believe the people who will be hit the hardest by this are people who are running Facebook ads to apps and want to track the different behaviors on the app, because you can use deep linking to track like purchases or different behaviors on the app itself. However, to my knowledge, you're not able to actually track the deep linking for people who opt out. So I'll let you know in that linked comment if this changes or if I'm missing something, but that's my understanding right now. I've heard a number of ads managers say it's more important than ever under iOS 14 to actually verify your business with Facebook. It's important to do in general. So if you've already verified, you can skip to this time code up there. Otherwise, keep watching. I'll show you step by step how to set that up. So you'll just go to business info and you'll want to set your primary page. Click save, and then also fill out the business details, and then business verification status. We can go to view details. You could set up 2-factor authentication. This is usually recommended for security, and for some people it'll be blue, other people it will be grayed out. So I wanted to show you how to fix that. So sometimes it can be grayed out because you haven't filled out your profile enough. Once you fill all this out, it should be blue. If it's still showing gray, you'll want to go to apps and just create a new app ID to manage business integrations. You will only do this if your verified business is still grayed out, and I'm not actually fully setting up the app. I'm just clicking next on the first couple prompts, which will put an app into our business settings, which should make that error go away. That's what you do, and you can see now we can start the verification. So you'll fill out all of your details, and then you'll have it. I think the easiest is to text your phone and then enter in the info. We are now going to set up Conversion API. This really helps with sending data from your website to Facebook and helps with tracking, especially with iOS 14. So we're going to cover Shopify and then jump right into WordPress. Jump to this time code if you're setting it up on WordPress. Okay, so we're in Shopify, and you'll want to make sure you have the Facebook sales channel. If you don't have it already, you can find it and just add it right there. And we'll go into setting it up. If you've already set it up, I'll show you how to do it on the app itself. So you're gonna go to create free and paid ads on Facebook, continue setup, and just select the right ad account, the right business manager, ad account, the correct Facebook page. And under data sharing, this is where we'll select maximum, which uses the conversions API. Then we'll also want to select the pixel for that website, make sure that's correct. Finally, we can just do our target country, and that will let us finish setup, and Conversions API is good to go. If you already have the app, you can go to settings, data sharing, and then here's where you select maximum and make sure that you have the right pixel selected. Let's install Conversions API on WordPress. We will want to have WordPress open, and we'll go to Facebook, but we will come back to that in a second. So click on ads. Then business tools will be right up here. It's 9 little dots. We can go to events manager, and we want to select the right business manager. You may just have the one. but make sure you have the right one because it's going to pull up the pixels that go with that. So you'll select the pixel that's on the website that you want to set this up for. I would recommend actually saving that pixel ID, copy it to your clipboard. You can open up text edit and paste it in there just for reference later. And we'll go to settings. And you'll scroll down quite a ways. It is right below the event setup. And here we have conversions API. We will want to choose a partner. Now we can select WordPress. And we'll turn on advanced matching and then turn on conversions API. We'll get an access token. We can copy this and paste it in our text. Click continue. And then we'll want to actually download the plugin. So we'll download it. If it's not going into the zip format, you can try a different browser, or if it's Safari, you can right click and do download link file as. And it's going to provide some instructions. I'll briefly cover what we're about to do. Basically, we're going to go into WordPress and we're going to install a new plugin and activate it, and then punch in the pixel ID. So let's go into WordPress to actually do those steps. So we'll go to plugins, then add new. Then we can upload a plugin and we'll choose that exact zip file to install now. Then activate the plugin. Then it said it includes support for Conversions API. So we can click here to configure that. All right, so we've got our pixel ID there. We want to make sure that it is actually the pixel that we want. So that does look correct. I'm going to paste it. Yeah, you want to make sure advanced matching is on. Turn on Use Conversions API. And then we want to paste the access token that we saved right there. And then do Save Changes. It says Settings Saved. And we can just go back to Facebook. And we want to verify the connection. Keep refreshing it. If it says that the pixel is not working correctly, you can also double check the number. And we actually don't need to do the event setup. I actually have a full tutorial on setting up events if you're interested in that. So we can just go to confirmation and we are all set with the Conversions API. Please like and leave me a comment if you found it helpful.